Hello again. The film Billy Elliot follows the story of a working-class boy from the northeast of England. Billy in question seeks to be a dancer and is confusingly not gay. Billy, of course, knows to not be a little wide-eyed lad homosexual, as do his family, who are reluctant to let Billy pursue said passion. What entails is a beautiful story of prodigy, masculinity and class, but what I find more interesting is not Billy himself, but his father Jackie and what I think he represents. The story is set against the backdrop of the miners' strikes of the 1980s, strikes which Jackie and Billy's brother Tony are both participating in, to their misfortune. And now, Jackie, being a class-conscious Chad, knows that one must never cross the picket line and instills into Tony a very clear view of how he feels about the scabs. He's not best pleased of the scabs, to say the least. Billy is well aware, despite being drawn to dancing, that his father, being a typical hard-nosed working-class geezer, would not approve of such a feminine and frivolous pursuit, and is inevitably proven correct when Jackie's apoplectic reaction is first seen upon first discovering Billy in the ballet class in question.
3 part ball and a 1, 2, 3 part ball ring.
You! Out! Now!
And subsequently gives him a scolding of all the appropriate male behaviours.
Lads do football or boxing or wrestling, not friggin' ballet.
A list that includes the boxing that Billy was supposed to be attending, but distinctly does not include ballet. Billy's middle-class dance teacher, Sandra, tries to encourage Billy to continue in spite of his father's wishes, to which, in quite an interesting reaction, Billy, seemingly not wanting to upset his father or maybe internalising his father's values, reacts by saying that Sandra will never understand why he can't do dancing because of her privilege.
You don't know anything! What do you know when you push out with the husband that pisses itself? You're the same as everybody else! All you want is to tell me what to do!
Now, wait a minute.
Look, I don't want to do your stupid fucking audition! You only want me to do it for your own benefit!
Luckily, Jackie eventually recognises Billy's talent and passion for dancing upon discovering Billy and his friend Michael dancing with each other. And despite his apprehensions of it being soft and gay and whatnot, allows Billy to continue and allowing him to go try out for the Royal Ballet School in London. Unfortunately, though, they're going to have to pay for that trip, and guess who's just been striking for months on end? Thus ensues one of the most tragic and meaningful scenes in the film, where Jackie attempts to cross the picket line, but is eventually stopped by Tony, breaking down in his arms in the centre of the coal pit, telling him about how he could be a genius and they need to give him a chance to succeed.
Can't smoke on here, mate. These are private buses.
Dad, you can't go back, not now! Look at the state of us, man. What have we got to offer the poor son?
Can't do this, not now! Not after all this time, not after everything we've been through!
It's for we bullet!
Fuck!
He may be a fucking genius for all we know!
Please! Please!
We're finished, son. What choice have we got, eh? Let's give the boy a fucking chance!
Spoiler alert. Luckily, the town have a whip round, and they eventually get the money to send Billy to the school, and he gets accepted. And in a very emotional final scene, Jackie and Tony sitting to watch Billy dance in Swan Lake, and stumble upon a now transgender, or perhaps just fashionable, Michael.
Sorry, mate. It's all right, Tony. It's me, Michael. Remember?
Billy, your family here. Thanks.
Now, I absolutely love this film. It's beautiful, complex, and the performances, especially by Gary Lewis as Jackie, are very raw and powerful. Great film. Worth a watch, even if I have just spoilt the ending. And when the BBC were producing things of quality. We used to be a country, goddammit. Right. The thing I love most about Billy Elliot is the way that it weaves its themes of classic masculinity together. It isn't, as you would expect it to be, simply a tearing down of masculinity crudely. It shows Jackie overcoming his preconceptions about dancing by recognising Billy's talent and the ability for his son to get out of the destitute situation that they're in. It shows him conquering masculinity with masculinity, I guess. Instead of potentially rightfully condemning Jackie for his beliefs, it attempts to at least show where these beliefs come from. Jackie knows that his son needs to be strong and hard-nosed and whatnot for the world that they live in. As far as Jackie's concerned, he doesn't want Billy to go and pursue this very frivolous pursuit in dancing that's unlikely to make them money, not least of which because he thinks it's going to make him soft or whatever. And he obviously tries to stop it using the values that likely his father beat into him.
Bally!
But after seeing Billy could potentially succeed in spite of that, he puts aside his beliefs and preconceptions and allows Billy to go and try pursue what he thinks is best. He does it in not only sacrificing his own beliefs around masculinity and how the culture around him will likely judge Billy, he also does it by sacrificing his beliefs around the strike itself and attempting to become a scab. He sacrifices his own values for his son. That scene in the coal pits, honestly, is one of the most evocative scenes I've seen in recent times, potentially due to its parallels to my own family, of the sort of working class family that sacrifice themselves to some extent to give their children a better life. And it's a gorgeous film, one that shows the dispossession of the deindustrialised working classes and a healthy view of sort of self-sacrificial masculinity, as well as like the power of art and dance to transcend class boundaries. And I think it is a masterclass in how to intertwine themes in a piece of media, especially and more succinctly in the way that it uses that character of Sandra, in the way that she looks at Jackie in that scene where he bursts through the door dramatically as some sort of uncivilized brute.
1, 2, 3 Partible Ray
And in the way that in that scene where Billy is expressing why he can't continue, it's set within their very noticeably larger and nicer house, and upon entering said house, you overhear Sandra's likely also middle-class partner expressing his hateful views towards the miners in a way that is very common still in modern British politics.
Uneconomical. If it costs more money to pay everybody to dig the coal out than you get for the coal when you sell it, what does that tell you?
Dunno.
Well, you want to think about that, don't you, son?
Tom.
If it was up to me, I'd shut the lot of them down tomorrow.
For God's sake.
What do you do, Mr. Wilkinson?
He's been made redundant.
All aboard the Skylark! All aboard the Skylark!
My little flower worms.
Like, yes, Jackie is wrong to be judgmental and homophobic in the way that he is, but the film also attempts to show the hardship through which those values are created, or even the fact that Jackie himself likely didn't have the mental space to engage with any of those ideas, unlike Sandra's partner, who instead of, as Sandra does, attempts to help people, uses his privilege to spit on them instead. I think the character of Sandra in this way is a great example of what in recent times has been termed luxury beliefs. Coined as a term by the writer Rob Henderson of the New York Times. In short, Margaret, it's all well and good you showing how good you are by advocating for defunding the police or abolishing prisons and whatnot, but you're not the person who's going to have to face their abusive partner after he's been released from prison, or, by extension, live in the places disproportionately affected by violent crime. A concept that, despite being popular in conservative circles online, I do think is a useful one when it comes to applying empathy and understanding to how values can often stratify upon class lines. Should scaffolded son or walk Cambridge daughter? Now, I don't think the example in Billy Elliot entirely is a luxury belief, given that the toxic masculinity on display probably isn't exactly useful as a belief, but what it does do is show how the more masculine temperament required to survive in such environments has a knock-on effect of potentially creating such views that you see in Billy Elliot, and that the masculinity itself is actually a useful way of being. That being, as mentioned in the previous section, I need to be a bit pragmatic, not have my son chase after frivolous and unlikely success in dancing, and he needs to do something that's going to toughen him up a bit as far as I see it.
Not friggin' Bali.
And it shows this really well in the way that it handles Jackie's eventual decision. It's not that he gets lectured to and then eventually decides to change his mind. It's that he sees his talent, sees how he could succeed, and then puts his values aside to let him pursue it. And it shows how they're caused by the same sort of underlining sort of amoral pragmatism that I think is somewhat fundamental to the masculine essence, as we will get into later. What I think makes Billy Elliot even more brilliant in this way is how accurately it has sort of typecasted Sandra in the way that those values stratify between the classes. That being the very real way in which, in modern Britain and I imagine the Western world at large, you will see more left-wing values being held by people of the middle and upper classes, or at least people in certain environments like universities and whatnot. So Sandra, being middle class and likely having gone to a higher education for dancing and whatnot, obviously has the values of those environments, and likewise Jackie and Tony have the beliefs of theirs. And I think that is the true way in which these sort of feminist/egalitarian beliefs seen in Billy Elliot can be seen as luxury beliefs. It's not just that, as mentioned previously, the more privileged don't need that sort of hard-nosed temperament that can create these more oppressive beliefs. It's also that the fact that they have the sort of space to think about them and to have these sort of correct beliefs belies their sort of privilege. As a side point, you could also potentially see another luxury belief at display in Billy Elliot, that being of your sort of uni leftists who will advocate for never crossing the picket line. It's always immoral, understandably, but you're not the one who's slowly starving to death for not doing so. This is in effect, I think, partially what leads to the anti-intellectualism of modern right-wing populist movements. That being the impression of the working classes that these sort of middle class and upper class elites have sort of out-of-touch values that are sort of hyper-academic or whatever. Both in the sense that, as mentioned, the fact that they hold their values belies their class, but also in the fact that they clearly don't understand why it is that those things have been created, why it is they need to be like that. This is unlike Billy Elliot, which I think beautifully captures this idea without conceding on its values of a sort of egalitarian world where people of any gender can pursue what they wish to do. And I see this within my own family, even within a single generation, where me and my youngest brother, both of whom went to university, have relatively more left-wing values when compared to the rest of our family, including our other brother, who has more relatively right-wing values that are more standard for the environment, which has been pointed out to me numerous times, even in the fact that I will regularly have to defend what is now termed woke beliefs to my brother's friends. So, you know, truly doing praxis. But I think this is why Rob Henderson's idea took such a hold amongst the right wing. It's not that those ideas uniquely apply to left-wing ideas. I mean, God only knows how frustrating it would be for women to listen to these right-wing men badger on about how they should take catcalling as compliments or whatever it might be. Any sort of conversation of women's rights will get batted away as sort of frivolous and made up, despite the fact that obviously they themselves will not suffer the consequences of not addressing the problems. Luxury beliefs are everywhere, boys. It's that those left-wing values being pushed on them are so clearly coming from people who do not have the experiences of them. And much in the way that that guy talking about women's rights belies their non-understanding of the experience, you're also... you being, if you're this kind of person, belies your not understanding of their experience. And the values themselves kind of reek of that. Now, I love empathetic media and people. And it's not just that, as I bang on about all the time on this channel, that you need to tailor your rhetoric to people and meet them where they're at for pragmatic reasons if you ever want your ideas to succeed. It's also that by not doing that, you are literally understanding the world less. And now to jump to the example that this video and all this prior waffle was even about, I think this is no more the case than in the discourse I see around men's mental health. And that despite the meme status online now of this sort of war on masculinity thing, that I do think that there is a sort of detrimental lack of masculine energy in the field of psychology, potentially. Often what I fear is happening in much of the case of men's mental health discourse is that there is this socially acceptable view of men just need to talk more, or men need to go to therapy, or whatever it might be, which is definitely true, right? Like, I mean, I see a lot of this sort of self-repression around me by lots of men in lots of spaces, and absolutely wreaks havoc on their mental health by extension. But much like how masculinity itself is often dismissed by people, the inadequacy of such a strategy will not be felt by the people who are advocating for it. Those people being often more feminine women, or people of the upper classes, relatively speaking, who either don't share the same psychology or don't share the same cultural landscape in which they will face the consequences of not behaving in that way, and in which they feel the need to repress themselves in the first place. I really feel like I need to hit home on this point so that the people who say this stuff understand how they probably come across. The way that you will see a guy and him going on about how you should take catcalling as a compliment, or how it's like not all men, or whatever response, whatever ignorant thing they're likely to say in response to your things, that is how you sound to those people when you see the memes of the men will do anything other than go to therapy, or they're saying that the reason that men kill themselves is because of a patriarchy that they made themselves, sort of blaming them for it, rather than even trying to help.
You know, most people commit suicide are men. Most people who work in dangerous workplaces are men. Most people who fight in war are men.
And who set that system up?
Which is like not even how culture works. Well, guess who set it up? Men did. It's like, well, not me. Like, it's like the collective of all men did a thing, potentially, or we've inherited some collective. Anyway, very annoying. I'm not God King of the mans, is what I'm saying. To give another example, if you see the way that those sort of Andrew Tate types will flip away from women's issues because they're like, oh, that doesn't matter, it's not real, that. These people often do similarly, let's say with incels or something. It's just pussy, bro. It's not that deep. We actually have to deal with being assaulted, which is like, fair, go off, queen, but also it just so clearly screams of a different lived experience. One that in this instance is literally just going to make them worse. You're like probably just generating more incels by saying stuff like that. But you almost definitely are, because I see the meme compilations, brother. In the way that those guys don't understand what it feels like for you to walk into a room and have to be looked at like you're some sort of game to be pursued, or be constantly on alert for threats, you don't understand what it's like for them to walk into that room and not be seen at all, or be seen as that threat, even if they're not. We just need empathy, guys, is what I'm saying. We need to apply empathy evenly, and we need to try and understand things. Before I go on as well, I also do not want to be seen to be saying men have it harder than women, or vice versa, or any of this. I mean, statistically, the reverse is the case. I often find this discourse a bit weird, because it's like statistically, women suffer from more mental health conditions on average. Men do kill themselves more, though, so you know what I mean. It depends what you think is worse. Live with the disorder or end it all. In the same way, I think it would be inappropriate for men to dominate the discourse around women's issues. The reverse is also true. Not that I'm saying that no one should talk about this. I'm a big fat lib. But also, right, like, everyone's welcome here, but it's just, let's be real, boys, right? We've been saying the solution for like maybe 2 decades at this point, and I can see the communication improving in these masculine spaces that I'm often part of, and the statistics are getting worse. So clearly it's not working at its own, boys. That's all I'm saying. It's clearly not working. Okay, next section. Essentialism. I think before I get to any actual suggestions in classic video essay fashion, I think we need to talk about masculinity and femininity itself as constructs or ideas themselves. You know, I want something that isn't, you know, femininity is when cry. Anyway, story time. Now, as an existentialist, postmodern, neo-Marxist, nihilist, godless, heathen, whatever, the likes of which Nietzsche and his Canadian disciple warned us all about. When I'm talking about any of these ideas, much like with any definition or construct, I am speaking as an existentialist in remission. By that, I mean, I am very well aware that there does not exist this robustly defined concept or property of masculinity and femininity out there in the world, probably. But I would say that for most things, including things in like physics and logic and stuff, so it's probably not a very interesting thing to say, in my opinion. But as I've gone on with my life, much like how I expressed in the social constructs video, contrary to what I think what would be now termed second wave feminism, liberal liberal feminism and liberalism generally might advocate, I do not think people are blank slates. I do think when we look around the world, we'll see certain clusters forming, much like most constructivists would probably say, to my knowledge. The question is here is whether that pattern or cluster is worth observing or recognising in some way. Now, if you're not a godless fallen one like myself, that might sound quite wacky, but it's not as nonsense of a view as it first might seem. That being, why am I saying that all that matters is if the idea or construct is useful or predictive in some way? Basically, I started doing a science example, and then I realised I'm a bit slow and I don't understand science, so we're doing a dumb example instead. Famous classic thought experiment, does this pile of sand exist? Okay, no. This is like... Philosophers are just memes. Okay, now that's not just, does this pile of sand exist as in can I see it? It's like, do piles exist? If I have anyone over the age of 40, they know that's definitely the case. So like, how many grains is a pile of sand? But at any given point on this sand to pile, to put the line at any point here feels a bit arbitrary and ridiculous. So let's say we said anything under 100 grains of sand is no longer a pile. You could just do like -1. It's like, well, what about 99 then? And it's like, yeah. Like, obviously these are the same. They're both piles. To get around this problem, let's just say there exists a property of piliness that gets applied to sand after 100 grains, but not up to that point. So you basically now have two problems. The first being, as we've just shown there, you're definitely going to be calling things that do not have this property of pileness piles of sand, because realistically, who knows perceptually what the difference is between 99 grains of sand and 100 at first glance? And secondarily, and more importantly, just point to that property. In the same way you can point to its diameter or its colour or its hardness or whatever, point to its pileness. You can't do it, obviously, so maybe that construct is just that, a construct. Maybe it isn't just some objective thing and is in fact a way of conceptualising the world. We could go on for hours with this game, as philosophers want to do, like what is sand itself? Okay, it's a molecule. Well, what is moleculiness? What's a proton? Whatever. You could do this forever. And much like we see in the case of the modern trans debate, people do it with gender and stuff. As I spoke about at length in the social constructs video, if you want more waffling about this topic specifically. What if we chop it off? What if you don't have him to begin with? What if he has like weird chromosomes or something? What is a pile of man? Now, something quite interesting happened in the 20th century, and is the reason I'm now having to do this section of the video, that being, what is masculinity and femininity? Go on, point to the thing. Go on, point to masculinity and femininity. Or you can't, or you can, and it just feels arbitrary. Boo-hoo, go back to the drawing board. Stinky modernist scum. The point I'm making with this section is, it's just not that interesting or unique to just point at these things, much like you would with pretty much any construct, and say, well, point to the property. By affirming a definition, according to people like myself, you're saying either this definition or construct is useful in some way, or it describes something repetitive, and even by extension of that, it's useful in some way. So I'm going to use this descriptor of pileness for this pile of sand in the knowledge that I would eventually lose against a philosophy autist because it's useful. Or, as I said, because this game can also apply to more fundamental objects like people or atoms or whatever. It's just got some like replicable ability that allows you to predict the world, or seems to be a thing of some variety. So let's do what's objectively correct by that way of reasoning, and we'll just observe the world as unconnected series of facts. Firstly, it wouldn't even be possible, because you are just going to do this where you sort of conceptualize the world. You are just going to see those atoms there as not the car and those atoms as the car. But also, it would actually just be less useful. It's like, oh, well, go to that pile of sand over there. To pretend that you didn't know what a pile of sand was, you'd get sacked, wouldn't you? If I replace the engine and all the doors and everything made up the car, the whip of Theseus, if you will, is it the same car? Who cares, mate? Does it drive? Those things there are the interesting and useful concepts. Like, is it predictive? Is it useful? Now, the solution that loads of people have had to this is to just affirm the existence, as I said, of those properties. So you just say abstract objects do exist in some way, but unless you're Thomas Aquinas or Plato, you probably don't agree with this. So you effectively just say they do exist in some kind of ethereal world of abstract objects, and there is a pileness there to which all piles refer to. Or that essence is shared between the set of all piles or something, and that instantiates some kind of essential thing about piles or whatever, right? Some mystical thing. Whatever, boys. Just point to it and I'll believe you. And I know you can't, so... I mean, I want it to be true, because it solves problems and things. Mathematicians believe this stuff, mathematical players Neoplatonism, stuff like this. It does solve various philosophical problems. So if you want to do that, go for it, lads. Now we get to the question, does masculinity and femininity exist? Does it exist in a way that like protons or atoms or whatever, like matter exists in some way? Probably not. It doesn't exist in the way that those constructs exist. And neither do any psychological definitions, really. You know, what makes someone autistic or having self-esteem or any sort of identifier, you know, like a sense of self or whatever. Like if you open their brain and go point to the autism, point to the self, whatever, you can't do it. Which is likely why such definitions were the target of such ire to begin with, much like with psychological disorders versus physical ones, where in the case of physical ones we can open you up and say, oh look, there's a clump of cells growing, we're going to call it cancer, and like clearly that's affecting this in some way. It's a bit harder to say, well, you struggle with eye contact and like Doctor Who a bit too much, so you have this property of autism now. Like, yeah, of course we observe some sort of physical properties using MRI, or we'll see the presence of certain brain chemicals or whatever in some cases, but really we're just pointing at stuff and recognising patterns. Okay, but then does masculinity and femininity exist in the way that something like autism does? Maybe, right? As in, can I observe consistent behaviours throughout a population that could be sort of explained by one unified sort of concept or essence, maybe? By extension, does that thing converge on some sort of physical signifiers, whether it be the size of relative parts of the brain or the presence of certain chemicals, etc.? Yes, I think you actually can. Just one example of such, to get away from whether brains are bigger or small or any of this sort of thing, but just the presence of testosterone on mood and behaviour and etc. Men on average have like 10 times the average testosterone or something. I'll check it and put it on screen or something. And obviously testosterone is pretty well known to have quite an effect on aggression and sex drive and the like. As you will all know, if you've ever been around a man or someone who's taking testosterone for transition or sports-related purposes. Just this one example of a fairly observable physical difference you could use as a way to conceptualise masculinity and femininity, at least to some extent, of why you might see certain behaviours in the population. So, why do men commit almost all the violent crime? Why do the vast majority of people who enjoy aggressive sports like mixed martial arts, why are they all men? So I do think you could start building up a sort of masculine and feminine mode of behaviour by such examples, if you wanted to use physical things. I don't even feel it's that radical particularly, as much as it's seen in the modern world, and people do tend to get a bit extreme with it, you know what I mean? It's like, feel this way because of some weird evil psych reason, you know what I mean? But I feel the aspect that which many people might have a problem with is this more sort of essential element of it. So take it from that controversial, more boring place of like men and women develop differently on average, so on average they have certain differences, to an even more controversial place into the realm of like personality tests and archetypes, where we're basically just constructing essences and playing around. So the idea of like the warrior or the mother and all this stuff, right? You know, you're looking at them as like, oh, do these appear cross-culturally? Could they have some shared essence or meaning behind them or whatever? Like, I'm probably not a full-on Jungian type, as in like there's literally a shared unconscious, but if you just take one example of like the mother as this sort of representation of care within the human mind, given that almost everyone has been given birth to by a mother, and that mother often will look after them and take care of them, the idea that those things would become this sort of cross-cultural phenomena, I think that's unreasonable. To use this idea of a sort of shared masculine and feminine essence across the human population, is that a useful concept in the sense that it allows you to operate within the world a bit better and maybe be able to explain certain behaviours when you look at things through that lens, like with any lens? I do think that is useful to an extent. And I'm hoping that my defence of constructivism in the beginning as my ultimate underlying framework will swiftly avoid a lot of these mid-wit comments about like, point to the femininity or whatever. Like, I don't want these comments. I want it to be, I don't think it's a good concept. I don't think that this is a useful thing. In the same way that you would be served in some contexts by applying a Marxist lens to history, material conditions or whatever, you might also be served sometimes in using this masculine-feminine dynamic, as long as you are reasonable about what you actually think those things are. We do just be constructing frameworks at the end of the day. Now, the definition that I've come to of what makes masculinity versus femininity was achieved by, firstly, as mentioned, what do male and female people tend to do on average, or like what do they empirically end up doing, and what is the through line between those behaviours, if one exists at all, and does that appear across cultures to some extent? And I reckon it's something like the masculine is sort of action, force, a focus on objects and tasks. And the feminine is sort of observation, contemplation, intuition, focusing on vibes and people. Some examples of situations that I think display this through line quite well. The girlie and the bestie. Name a more iconic duo. Usually, you will not see more masculine gay people be friends in this way. You won't see this sort of vibe play out. So it's clearly not sexuality which is the through line here. It is usually the drag enjoying twink types that fulfill this role, that much like drag itself, enjoy nothing more than a heart-to-heart conversation, a cheeky gossip, and reading someone for filth.
Ginger man, bitch, you are shaped like a deep breath.
So I think the thing that makes this phenomenon itself is the underlying feminine essence of both people, those being intuitive observations of vibes and people. And now on the masculine end, now I love a contact sport, whether it be martial arts, footy, or a bit of paintballing, or in my case, dressing up and playing army, airsoft. Now, if you ever played football, or especially been to an MMA gym, you might notice it's a bit of a sausage fest. And it tends to be quite the situation of, we're going to do this task together, and we might throw some banter at each other in between, you know, like call him a knobhead or whatever. Importantly, to be good at sports generally, and especially contact sports like MMA or jiu-jitsu, you need to be quite aggressive and quick and decisive in making a decision, like very intentful. Not that I am, of course, which is one of the things that I get told off for by all my peers, which is that I do tend to sit there and think about things a bit too much, which I think is me probably being a bit more feminine on average, which is also played out in the way that I will be seen as a bit soft by a lot of the other members of the gym. But importantly here, what pulls these two things together, that being the vibe of the place, the fact that people are drawn to it, etc., and the fact that they're probably better at it on average, is this masculine idea of action and force and focusing on tasks. So basically these two examples are, why are these people behaving this way? What's their vibe? Let's all consider it and talk about it, versus I am just going to smack this person now because that is the correct thing to do right now. Enough said. Now I hope these essences bear some resemblance to your own sort of experiences in life, as I imagine they will do, because I think they're pretty accurate. To get a bit more spicy, why I think that a lot of this discourse you see around sort of liberal feminism is even more incorrect than you might first think. It's not just as like right-wing people would say that women are not on average drawn towards MMA or jiu-jitsu and these contact sports or whatever, and thus you don't see the representation you would hope to see. It's that the feminine essence itself is sort of not in line with that behaviour. Downstream of that, the culture itself will reinforce that, which is obviously the main point of critique. It's that the culture itself of these places, of these spaces, the energy, is antithetical to them. But I would say that the actual situation here isn't like rampant misogyny. It's that the vibe of the place is masculine oriented, right? It's the fact that it's by its nature a bit more aggressive, tends to cater to that mindset. Interestingly, another way I think this framework works is that when you do see more feminine people in these places, that you will see the way they engage with the stuff a little bit differently. They're often doing it in a feminine way, in a sense. That the fact that they get to be seen as doing a masculine or hardcore type sport was a large part of their sort of justification and reasoning for starting, at least subconsciously. The hashtag not like other girls, or I am very big and strong and I'm going to beat people up type individuals. And I want to be clear, especially because some of the people from my gym might watch this, I don't think it's like a male-female thing. It's a masculine-feminine thing. It's like there are women who are masculine that aren't like this and don't care about this, and they just, you know, they're very much the same sort of vibe. And there are men that you see and they have the more feminine type. It's just different vibes. It's actually as well why I would argue a lot of the so-called masculine posturing you see online in these sort of red pill type spaces is actually quite feminine. The actual masculine person is like the grug, Yadar, right? This guy who's sort of, I am doing this now. That's it. Not the person who's like, oh, what will people think of me if I do this? I need to appear masculine. I need to look strong and all this stuff. So for those people, if they actually wanted to be masculine, the sort of looks-maxing, you know, hyper-socialised behaviours probably are doing the reverse of that. At least in my opinion. The guy who's like, I need to pick my bag up in the right way.
This is how you sit like a fucking man. You don't sit with your legs spread open. You don't sit with your legs crossed.
This is like hyper feminine. it's like you are only concerned with like the vibe that you're putting out. So another bit of reasoning that got me to why potentially you might see these patterns is the way that men and women are embodied on average. So as you well may know, women on average are a bit smaller and weaker than men. So it makes sense that the way that men often exhibit violent and aggressive behaviour, often towards women, as a counter to that and as a strategy, the strategy of defence would be way more optimised for detecting potential threats versus actually fighting it. That being the intuitive feeling of someone being dangerous or whatever on a micro level, but on the macro level, being able to more clearly see the sort of social structure and being able to navigate your way within that is going to be a way more important skill for women to develop than the sort of action directionality of masculinity required to actually fight it. To get even more right-wing spicy on this, the fact that the mother is sort of the mammalian default carer, given the fact that she literally has baby feed strapped to her chest, the idea that she would develop a sort of hyper-vigilant and sort of awareness of a threat, I don't think is that unreasonable, especially when spanned over tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of years of evolutionary pressure. And again, fundamentally feminine, observant, vibes-based, intuitive. As people say, there's nothing scarier than mama bear in nature. Now, while discussing these ideas over the past few months with my girlfriend, who is actually the person who originally came to me with the unified sort of feminine essence as fussing, as she put it, given that she's an internally misogynistic pick-me. But yeah, I prefer not to make these discussions overly weighted towards the feminine or the masculine, as you'll see online. You'll see this sort of red pill analysis that is often literally on the level of the masculine is when big, strong, rational, calm, collected, massive penis, and the feminine is when cry, annoying and weak. Anyway, in these discussions, I kept saying to her that I think there's this conception of the feminine essence being chaotic that I just think is actually incorrect. I think that's the opposite of true. I think the feminine is way more suited to a sort of calm, ordered social structure or whatever it might be than the sort of like action, chaotic masculine, let's say. The reason that she gave for potentially why this might be an effect that gets seen is that due to the fact that women are often more observant, etc., that they are simply pointing out issues that already exist and thus it's then perceived as her causing the sort of issue. It's the effect of like the single guy who lives in a room with a deck chair and a mattress and then he gets a girlfriend and then she says, "Can we actually decorate this?" And he's like, "Well, you know, you're causing problems here." And it's like, well, the absence of pleasant was there to begin with. She's simply pointing it out and encouraging you to do a bit better, let's say. Last example, Fight Club versus Mean Girls. Both films that I love. In fact, I was actually surprised by how much I enjoyed Mean Girls because sort of visually, it's usually the sort of film that's not really for me, I guess, you know, the sort of chick flick, whatever. The power of archetypal stories, I guess. Much like Billy Elliot, both serve, I think, as an empathetic critique of both toxic masculinity and femininity, in the way that it shows how both can occur, quite sincerely. In the case of Fight Club, with the masculine action orientation of being like, I feel bad, my life is meaningless, I'm going to go do something dramatic to try solve it, I feel I have no agency and I will violently strike out to stop it. It also shows like a masculine male bonding pattern, the way that the guys look at each other in the office after kicking 10 bells out of each other on the weekends. But clearly, in showing how this is toxic and damaging in the way that they literally end up doing domestic terrorism. I mean, I guess it depends if you're anti-capitalist or not, if you like that, because they try to reset debts or something. But ultimately, they do end up shooting themselves in the head. So, probably a bit self-destructive in a way. And then, with Mean Girls, through Lindsay Lohan's character, as you can see her sort of positive femininity in the beginning, through her kindness and respect towards other people. And then eventually, after she identifies the sort of social structures, and the Mean Girls get her on side, let's say, the same awareness of people leads to the way that they all terror each other, which eventually gets rectified by the Queen Tina Fey in the end, with a sort of more mature feminine presence that gets them all to sort of kiss and make up. Interestingly, Tina Fey's character shows a little bit of a masculine edge in the way she behaves here, in the way that it's a bit like, sit down, shut up, behave yourselves. Perhaps a fundamental aspect of maturity there is being able to appropriately synthesize the masculine and the feminine, lest you get hit by a bus. But importantly, both films are enjoyed by both types of people. Probably because they show sincerely and honestly both sides of the coin in respect to the sort of archetypes that they inhabit. Famously, men misunderstand Fight Club as seeing it as a celebration of masculinity, and I think that shows just how good of a critique it actually is. It's almost like steel manning masculinity to them, much as how I imagine Mean Girls is quite a refreshing watch for the sort of hyper-socially aware girly pops in the audience. So there we have it. Essentialism for grown-ups. And I'll say before we go on, people are very similar in important ways. This is just a pattern pattern that has been observed, and I think it works. As I said multiple times, but I need to keep saying it because otherwise I'll get the comments. You can have masculine women and feminine men. That's perfectly fine. I gave examples of that to illustrate that. Everything I now say are suggestions in a sort of area that I think has been dominated by feminine essence or feminine energy and could do with a bit of injection of the opposite. Men will do anything other than go to therapy. As mentioned previously, common meme, and a proper knee slapper if ever I've seen it, but under which I think belies an important aspect of men's mental health, that being the aforementioned action, aggressive, dramatic aspect of masculinity. If we think back to the feminine versus masculine, feminine being to sort of observe and concern oneself with various goings-on, emotionally and socially, let's say. The masculine urge is something like, I need to go and do a thing. Let's go blow up a building because I feel bad about myself. You know what I mean? Let's do an outburst. Or more accurately, how it actually manifests in the modern world. My boyfriend wakes up at 5:30, watches alpha motivation videos with tigers and whatnot on does various torture methods on himself, and then goes for a run with the boys. My boyfriend's talking about how he wants to die in a war. My brother has started a football team where they have to mutilate each other to join. If nothing else, men have a flair for the dramatic. David Goggins and his consequences. Whereas I would contrast this to the feminine urge, which I think is better suited to modern psychological remedies, let's say. That being, I need to talk and discuss my feelings with my friends, etc. Go to talking therapy, hence the mean reference. Now, I have been informed by my girlfriend's sister, who is a psychologist, that I am actually deeply wrong, and I'm very silly. In all seriousness, obviously talking therapy is useful for all people and is actually quite a beneficial thing to be doing if you have problems that you need identifying, etc., sort of emotional things you haven't been able to deal with your own sort of support network. However, it almost definitely does, much like go talk to your mates type behaviour, very much does appeal to a more feminine temperament, which makes sense given that the field of psychology, both statistically and its orientation towards people, appeals more to a sort of feminine type of person. Which definitely applies to the lady in question, who is the type that would likely cry at a lonely pebble because he looks sad. Maybe it's the case that some of these behaviours that get memed on a bit, the I'm going to go to a stormy field at night and pick up heavy rocks. Maybe that actually is very useful when dealing with upsetting emotions for people of a more masculine temperament. Even if it seems frivolous and silly to you, in the same way that many of those masculine types will see the classic cry to each other in the club toilets pep talk a somewhat entertaining concept. But it is interesting in that club toilets way, because I know in the way that the people and the women that share these memes are befuddled by male behaviour, that I am befuddled by that club toilet pep talk. It's just this very platitudinal, you are loved, you are valued, this kind of thing. It's because it's like, well, you don't know me, so like, it doesn't mean that much, you know what I mean? Like, it's sweet that you want me to feel nice, which I guess is maybe that's the element of it that they like. I don't know. How does that even help? It would just feel awkward if people did that to me. Maybe that's a bit of the old toxic masculinity. You see that instinct there? Like, I'm going, oh, maybe it's toxic. It's like, no, maybe it's not. Maybe we're just different. You know what I mean? Maybe that's valuable to you, not to me. You know what I mean? And it's not that we're both defective. And importantly here, if your goal is encouraging men to talk between each other about how they feel about stuff, a great way of doing that is by getting them to do tasks together in environments that resonate with them and actually make them feel bonded to each other in a way that would allow them to do that. So much in the way that Jackie and Billy Elliot is shown how his behaviour is silly, rather than him being preached at by some kind of heroic figure would likely be the alternative, you can encourage this positive behaviour with better strategy. As long as the culture of that environment that you're encouraging, let's say like a football team would be a classic example, isn't actively antithetical to any sort of emotional connection, which is obviously the problem that's being pointed at by a lot of this discourse, but one that I think is somewhat overstated. Some of the best conversations I've ever had with people are between rounds at jiu-jitsu or in the sauna. And I will say, I'm a yappist at the best of times, so maybe I'm not the best... I'm definitely not the best case study for this, but, it's a two-way streak to have a conversation in it. One example that I heard from the same psychologist lady was that of men's sheds, where they get guys together to fix stuff for the local community, so like there'll be like a strimmer or something broken, and then they'll all get together and they'll sort it out. This is clearly a sick intervention for male mental health, and we should be doing more of this, basically. Because that guy's probably not going to go to the therapist. He might not even have access to the fact that he feels a a certain way about stuff. But, you know, he's there with his mate Bob. He's like, oh, you know, we're fixing the strimmer. Oh, you're right, mate. Yeah. How's the wife? Oh, no, she's being a bit of a knobhead. That's probably the discussion they're realistically going to have. So, oh, well, you know, she's being a bit of a pin. Oh, that's a shame, mate. You know what I mean? I had this problem with my wife. And, you know, they're doing the little thing together. And afterwards, not only do they feel better in the way that you've expected them to do it, go express your feelings to each other, but it's also made them feel better because they now have a sense of achievement and they feel like they're a valuable person, which if you look at a lot of the reasons that people put for why they off themselves or why they feel depressed is that they feel like a burden. And this is like a big thing for men generally, is that they want to feel useful, they want to feel like they can provide for people. And I think that is a positive masculine urge. One, again, that I dislike that we kind of attack, this kind of, well, he's mansplaining or whatever. I saw this really funny bit by a comedian called Finley Christie about this, so I might put it on screen.
Men, your lines are in green. Women, your lines are in cyan. Cyan, women, is the colour between blue and green.
Look how Tarantino uses one continuous shot here. That's really cool.
Sometimes this is a malignant instinct, and it definitely is, but I think that's an example there of just a bit of a misunderstanding. It's like, they probably are mostly doing that. The thing of like, yep, I did that. I fixed that thing for you. I think that is the true positive masculinity. It's your dad going, don't worry, lad, I'll get your ball down for you, and then being very chuffed with himself afterwards, right? Additionally, this sort of interventions are very much a once more into the breach, my friends sort of camaraderie. We're like doing a thing together. And you'll see this in male friendships a lot, which is seen as a negative, but I actually think is quite a beautiful thing, really. Yeah, he's a knobhead, but like, I would die for him. I feel like men will hear the example of the men's sheds and they'll go, that's a sick idea, I bet that really helped. Or they'll hear the example of like a guy starting a club with his mates. One example that I heard of recently, this guy gets up in the morning with his mates, you know, they'll do a Goggins or whatever, but they have different themes. And my girlfriend showed me this. Girl told about how like her boyfriend planned one night that was about poetry. They had like a poetry night. So he came and recited loads of poetry and then they went on a run together. And like, I feel like every guy hears that and it's like, that's sick. But then if you tell them, oh, you need to go to a therapist office and like go, oh, I feel this way, just confront your mate in a bar and go, oh, I feel like this about something, that's probably less appealing. But I find this thing beautiful, let's all like share this, maybe shed a tear and then go and do something together, that is like so much richer, I think, and so much more applicable to the masculine instinct. And I think if you take anything from this video, it's to hopefully bridge this gap a bit, to give some insight into that kind of mindset maybe. Hashtag not all men. Last section of all this waffle, I'm afraid. I think another obligatory mid-wit debunk is in order. When I say this, not only is it not the case that all men are masculine and all women are feminine, it's also the case that many of the suggestions I've talked about above actually would improve the mental health of everybody, I think. And I'm going to give some more examples of things that could be used alongside talking therapy potentially, or maybe we should try do more of, at least in my opinion. Distinctly did not go to university for psychology though. The reason I ended up making this video is for two reasons really. One is because I've been thinking a lot about the appropriate place of these concepts of masculine and feminine, and if they even make sense at all, and if they should be thrown out, after talking to many of you sort of J.K. Rowling types, or sort of Foucault-pilled schizoids, but also because, as I said, fundamentally, the suicide rates are not going down, and I think the problem might even be deeper than just the field of psychology itself being feminine-coded. It actually could be that the entire ecosystem around it is also like that. Maybe I'm letting the TikTokification of mental illness poison my mind a bit here, but there are very clearly positive mental health interventions that can be made that are just not seen as reasonable and are actively seen as problematic and fought against as ideas. Namely the above sort of man sheds, let's get people together and get them to sort of directionally fit things, but also exercise, aggression, like getting anger out type behaviour, you know, maybe like contact sports like your rugby or martial arts as I mentioned, and obviously community. And in the extreme of this, maybe even sort of gatekeeping type hazing behaviours that are commonly seen as quite negative. Somewhat understandably to be fair, but community is the big one. Community is not a Reddit page of people with beards or Labubu owners, whatever, r/Labubu, whatever it is, right? It's something with entry standards that garner respect. And this is why I love martial arts gyms and sports generally. It's not like you just get respect for nothing, you obviously would get respect in the sort of regular way of being rizful and funny or whatever. You're not going to get respect in these environments unless you're actually improving or doing better. Like, that's how it's meaningful, right? Kind of for the same reason that people like myself would see the sort of hyper-feminine affirmation type behaviour as quite silly. Well, you don't have any reason to say that, and like, I don't even know if I deserve that. Whereas if there are standards in which to reach that can be gained, like notice that behaviour, you're being appreciated for succeeding in a way that we've all sort of chose to engage on. And I think this community thing is probably the big reason why we have such bad mental health outcomes in the modern world. And obviously, it's probably primarily caused by consumer capitalism, where everyone's in their own little life pods, getting Amazon parcels delivered around or wherever. But the reason I'm bringing this up is because I do feel in this like sort of shared global culture, and especially in this like sort of online psychology kind of space that I'll see sometimes, and obviously within psychology itself, there's this sort of distaste towards any sort of gatekeeping or levels of standard of behaviour and things like this, because it's like exclusionary or whatever. No, you can't just come and become part of this community. You can rock up to a gym and everyone will be nice to you, but you can't just have the respect and the same as everyone else, because you're not the same as everyone else. You haven't got to the standards of behaviour. And this applies to me too, right? Like, there are places that I go to that are like better than me and they'll get more respect, and they should, because they're better. I don't have the right to go in there and go, I deserve the same. Well, of course no one's going to respect that. And that's what makes it meaningful. I think that's why the sort of masculine temperament is drawn towards that, to the point of oppression sometimes, to the point of being like, you must meet these standards, otherwise you are scum.
Pile, don't make any fucking effort to get up to the top of the fucking obstacle. If God wanted you up there, he would have miracled your ass up there by now, wouldn't he? Say it, sir! Get your fat ass up there, Pile!
I'm not describing hazing specifically here, but to extend it to something like a hazing type behaviour, it's obviously not something I think is good. Like, you know, I'm the type of guy who doesn't want to play red arse at football because I'm a bit of a pussy. It's such clearly like an attack on the sort of masculine vibe there. You didn't need to join that community. Like, you didn't have to join that thing. I need to be allowed to be in this place, or like, I need to be accepted. Yeah, it's hard and probably stupid, actually, a lot of the time, but that's what they're doing. They're selecting for people by doing that. That's the point of the hazing, right? The fact that you don't want to do it, that's why it's there, right? And I said, I feel like that kind of feminine urge to be like, well, why are you doing that? That's silly, that's frivolous, that's stupid, is very much feminine dominating the masculine in some real sense here, I feel. Which, again, you see in the mental health space generally, which is kind of the point of bringing it up, right? Like, this sort of meme about, yeah, bro, if you're depressed, go for a run. And it's like, yeah, but unironically, though. Like, both empirically and, like, anecdotally in my case, those things massively improve your mental well-being. Here are some like studies about the effects of exercise on mental health well-being and outcomes and stuff. This is very viably a valid suggestion, right? But it isn't a valid suggestion in a space where we say, well, not everyone can do that because some people are disabled and some people are sort of too depressed to even take that step. And to those people you say, well, that's sad, but it's still a good thing to strive towards. Both things can be true. Well, I'm allergic to beans. It's kind of that thing. It's just like, yeah, like that, you know, that's unfortunate if that is the case. A space that would be dominated by the masculine urge would just be, tough luck, mate, just try harder. And that is oppressive and wrong. But also, that doesn't mean you just kind of go, we can only do the sort of safest option, which is evidently not torturing yourself with blooming like cardio in the case of the David Goggins types, right? Or the like, let's haze people so they can get into a community that feels actually meaningful to be part of or whatever. True balance here is we have empathy for those people who aren't at the level where they can actually do things. So like, they're too mentally ill to actually do some of these other things, like join a community because they're too socially anxious, or they're too depressed to get up and, you know, do exercise and things like this. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't suggest these other things, because they actually can help people. Like, and I think of toxic masculinity as that kind of, I'm going to try shut myself down emotionally and just kind of get stuff done and all this stuff. Then toxic femininity is kind of, it's being dominated by a sort of culture in the way that it's allowing sort of understanding and empathy to overwrite action, like overwrite something that actually could be useful and a good suggestion. You know, we should absolutely try and encourage this more feminine balance in these spaces, but you're not going to do that by just preaching at people. You're going to do that by going to the places, becoming part of the communities, and actually just edging it in the right direction. And also, by doing so, you'll probably help your own mental health too, because you'll get some rage out of the world. You'll be able to join a community of people who respect you for the same sort of thing. Like, I'm not a psychologist. I'm an autist with a dream. Right? Like, if the outcomes are not changing after continuing to suggest the same socially acceptable cures because they're just that they're socially acceptable, maybe that itself is toxic. I've mentioned David Goggins a few times here, right? But from what I've heard about him in interviews, he was someone who was basically a child abuse victim and saw his mother get beaten up. And his way of dealing with that was to basically go, I am going to inflict pain on myself to build up resilience so that can't hurt me anymore. For sure, this is probably not best in the long run for his mental well-being. And like very clearly, he's destroyed his body through this sort of behaviour. But it definitely helped. And it's helped a lot of people by advocating for that in a way that I think no amount of men just need to talk could ever help them. I think the big critique of this could be, well, why did you use the masculine and feminine thing to describe this and not just list those things that you think were good mental health interventions, right? And I think it's because these things are related. So you get a more holistic view of the world if you see it through a feminine or a masculine lens, of like the dominance of the wills, as I've termed it. Just as the fact that men are the ones who play most contact sports and men are the ones that commit most of the violent crime are not unrelated facts. And it's also not unconnected, the fact that they're actually probably better at those crimes. You've never felt a harder punch than a man whose football team has just lost. Or would, apparently. They're confusing people, these bastards. It's not isolated, the fact that women practice psychology at about 80% of the rate of men, and the fact that a lot of the suggestions from the psychology field and the discourse around it are all very feminine oriented. And because of that, if you can identify this, if a place is more masculine and feminine, you can actually tailor things that would be more suited for those people, and maybe you need an injection to balance it out. Like, the optimal space for each individual and community is not utter dominance by the feminine or the masculine, as you'll see in any of these examples. It is a healthy balance of both. It's not the, I'm not going to advocate for something seen as offensive, in the case that I see happening with psychology. And it's also not casting people onto the rocks because they can't meet a very strict standard, or because they showed weakness by expressing a unapproved emotion of some variety, which is the very classic, toxic masculine critique, let's say. It's being able to respect and enjoy both the hyper-masculine boxing gym and football match, and also being able to enjoy and respect the feminine type drag or theatre type environments, and then trying to integrate aspects of both, which is what I tried to do to some extent. Maybe for both the boys and the girls, it's not good enough to just talk about your problems, but you need to do some things that make you feel valuable as a person, that you can join a group of people who value you, and maybe actually act out those feelings in the world. Maybe those alpha male boot camps are actually a good choice for the wettest of all people who need it. Maybe David Goggins is based, actually. Maybe I'm just a chud. Hope you enjoyed.